I want you to picture a man who literally built a global empire on digital security.
Right, a pioneer. The guy who basically taught the entire world how to hide and protect their digital footprints.
Exactly. But then picture that exact same guy spending the last decade of his life completely insecure. I mean, on the run from cartels, the police, the IRS.
Yeah, armed to the teeth in a jungle compound.
And at one point, literally burying himself in the sand of a Central American beach with a cardboard box over his head just so he could breathe, hiding from the local police.
It's honestly like something out of a movie.
Right. And how did this absolute genius of digital stealth eventually get caught a few weeks later? Because a journalist took a photo of him, posted it online with the headline, "We're with John McAfee right now, suckers," and completely forgot to scrub the hidden GPS coordinates from the image file.
The irony is just staggering.
It really is. Today, we are taking a deep dive into how John McAfee went from a $100 million Silicon Valley pioneer to an international fugitive running crypto scams from a heavily armed yacht.
It really is one of the most astonishing character arcs in modern tech history. We're talking about the architect of digital safety, a man whose code is likely in the DNA of the device you are listening to this on right now.
Which is wild to think about.
Yeah, and he ended up living a life defined by total, unmitigated physical and legal chaos.
So to figure out how that actually happened, we're going on a massive deep dive into the source material surrounding his life. We've got a towering stack of sources to pull from today.
Lots to get through.
Oh, definitely. We're looking at extensive investigative reports from Wired and Gizmodo, the actual SEC and DOJ federal indictments regarding his financial maneuvers, plus the incredibly detailed Showtime documentary Gringo.
And international news coverage too, right?
Yeah, outlets like the BBC and Reuters. And crucially, a highly revealing, really intimate podcast interview with his widow, Janice McAfee.
It's a vast amount of information, and our mission today isn't just to, read you a timeline of events.
No, that would be boring.
Right. Our goal is to investigate the mechanics behind the crimes, both the alleged ones and the proven ones, to unpack the complex psychology driving these decisions.
And to try and make sense of the heavily debated circumstances surrounding his end. The end of a man who was equal parts genius innovator and fugitive suspect. Exactly. We're not here to act as judge and jury today. We're here, alongside you, to dig into a story that is part true crime thriller and part tech history mystery. We want to understand the how and the why. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Starting with what is arguably the most infamous chapter of his life, right?
Yeah.
The move to Belize, the standoff, and the murder next door.
Yeah. So he sells out of his company, makes an absolute fortune, and around 2009, he relocates to the Central American nation of Belize.
But he doesn't just buy a vacation home. He establishes properties on the island of Ambergris Cass, and later he builds this massive compound deep in the mainland jungle village of Carmelita.
Right, and the stated reason for this move is where the story immediately gets weird.
Very weird. He launches a business venture down there called Quorumex. He brings in this Harvard-trained microbiologist named Alison Adonicchio. And the public goal of this facility is to research jungle plants to find natural plant-based antibiotics.
Okay, wait.
Specifically, they were looking into something called anti-quorum sensing technology.
Stop right there. Anti-quorum sensing. For those of us who, haven't taken advanced microbiology recently, what exactly does that mean?
It's actually a fascinating biological concept. Think of bacteria not as solitary, mindless cells, but as an army.
Okay, an army of bacteria?
Yeah. If one single bacterium attacks your body, your immune system just wipes it out instantly. So bacteria have evolved a way to wait until they have overwhelming numbers before they strike.
Oh, wow.
They secrete these chemical signals to basically count each other. And when the concentration of those chemicals reaches a certain threshold, a quorum, they all simultaneously switch on their attack mode.
So they're waiting for backup.
Exactly. That communication network is quorum sensing.
Okay, so they're basically using chemical walkie-talkies to coordinate a synchronized ambush.
Precisely. And anti-quorum sensing is the biological equivalent of jamming those radio frequencies.
I see.
The idea is that if you can introduce a compound, say extracted from a rare Belizean jungle plant, that blocks those chemical signals, the bacteria never realize they have an army. They never turn on their attack mode, and your immune system can just mop them up.
That genuinely sounds incredibly noble, like scientifically advanced and useful.
It's a real alternative to traditional antibiotics, which just try to carpet bomb the bacteria and often lead to antibiotic resistance.
Yeah, I have to push back here.
Sure.
Why the jungle? Why does A tech billionaire, a guy who made his name writing assembly code for computers, suddenly decided he needs to be the guy extracting plant juice in a remote Central American swamp.
It's a fair question.
Was this an earnest scientific pursuit? And because, knowing what we know about his later desire to escape U.S. regulators, this sounds like a highly convenient, incredibly sophisticated cover story for someone who just wanted to build an off-the-grid fortress.
The sources suggest it was a very messy collision of both. McAfee was genuinely obsessed with complex systems. First digital viruses and then biological ones.
Right.
But you're right to be skeptical of the setup, because the environment he built around this quote-unquote research facility was anything but a standard sterile laboratory.
Yeah, not a lot of white lab coats running around.
Exactly. The Carmelita jungle compound quickly became heavily militarized. He surrounded himself with armed security guards, many of whom were locals with extensive criminal records.
Wow.
He was interacting heavily with the local underworld. It looked less like a biotech startup and more like a warlord's encampment.
Which naturally draws the attention of the authorities.
Oh, absolutely.
And that brings us to April 2012. The Belize Gang Suppression Unit, the GSU, conducts a massive military-style raid on his compound. They just storm the gates.
Right.
The official warrant says they suspected him of manufacturing methamphetamine.
Now, we need to be very precise here based on the investigative reports. The GSU did not find a meth lab. They found 0 methamphetamine. None at all.
None. What they did find was a massive, unlicensed arsenal of weapons. Pump-action shotguns, high-caliber handguns.
And a chemistry lab.
Yes. A lab that was apparently being used to research and synthesize a completely different drug. MDPV.
MDPV, that is the chemical compound commonly known in the U.S. as bath salts, right? A wildly potent psychosis-inducing stimulant.
Exactly. Methylene-edioxypyrovalerone. And the distinction between meth and MDPV is super important to understand McAfee's mental state at the time.
How so?
Well, methamphetamine primarily works by forcing your brain to dump massive amounts of dopamine all at once. MDPV is different. It's a reuptake inhibitor. It acts more like cocaine, but incredibly amplified.
Okay.
It blocks your brain's ability to recycle dopamine and norepinephrine, causing them to just pool in your synapses. The result is intense hyperstimulation, extended periods of wakefulness, we're talking days without sleep,
Oh, man.
and profound, terrifying paranoia.
And he wasn't just casually dabbling in this either.
No, not at all. The Gizmodo reports dive deep into his online footprint during this time. Around 2010 and 2011, McAfee was highly active on a popular drug discussion forum called Blue Light.
Yes, posting under the alias Stuffmonger.
Right. And he wasn't hiding his expertise. He made over 200 posts detailing his synthesis of NDPV, giving actual chemistry tutorials to other users.
It's crazy. He wrote extensively about the freebase version of the drug and explicitly described the extreme paranoia and hypersexuality it induced.
Just laying it all out there.
Yeah, he talked about measuring doses down to the milligram to maintain what he considered an optimal state of heightened awareness.
So he's basically crowdsourcing his own descent into chemical paranoia on a public message board.
Pretty much.
So the GSU doesn't find meth, but they raid an environment steeped in experimental psychoactive drug use and heavily armed men.
Right. And during this raid, the police shoot and kill one of his dogs. They confiscate his passport, and they briefly detain him for the weapons.
It's an incredibly violent, traumatic escalation.
It is. But the narrative of why this raid happened shifts wildly, depending on who you ask.
Okay, tell me about that.
If you listen to Janice McAfee, his widow, she offers a completely different, highly systemic motive. In her podcast interviews, she insists the Belizean government wasn't looking for drugs at all.
What were they looking for?
They were looking for a payoff. She alleges that a powerful local politician had recently demanded a $2 million donation, effectively an extortion bribe to let McAfee operate his businesses in peace.
And when McAfee told this politician to get off his property, the GSU raid was their violent retaliation,
Yeah.
a warning shot.
That is the claim.
Yeah.
And McAfee's alleged response to this extortion attempt is where his background as a cybersecurity pioneer comes crashing into his life as a jungle warlord.
Oh, this part of the story is unbelievable.
It really is. According to the accounts he shared with Janice and various reporters later, he didn't hire lawyers or go to the press. He went on the cyber offensive.
He claims he purchased dozens of cheap laptops, preloaded them with incredibly sophisticated keylogging spyware, and then distributed them as gifts to various Belizean government officials, secretaries, and police leaders.
Yes.
He literally Trojan horsed the entire government of Belize.
What's fascinating here is the sheer audacity of the claim. To understand how intrusive this is, a software keylogger doesn't just monitor your web history.
No, it's way deeper than that.
It operates at the kernel level of the operating system. It records every single physical keystroke you make on that keyboard, every password typed, every drafted email, every private message, before it's even encrypted by a secure messaging app.
Wow.
The software then secretly bundles all that text data and transmits it back to a remote server, in this case, allegedly controlled by McAfee.
Oh, wait, I have to ask, is there any actual hard proof he did this? Or is this just the ultimate hacker power fantasy cooked up by a guy who is potentially losing his grip on reality due to sleep deprivation and MDPV?
That is the dividing line in his entire biography. McAfee claimed he collected gigabytes of intercepted data. He said he found undeniable evidence of massive drug trafficking, money laundering, and even murder for hire orchestrated by people at the highest levels of the Belizean government. But he never released this supposed trove of evidence to international authorities in a verifiable way.
Which is incredibly convenient. I have the evidence that proves a massive conspiracy against me, but I can't show it to anyone.
Exactly.
It perfectly sets the stage for the intense, all-consuming paranoia that defines the rest of his time in Belize. I mean, he genuinely believed he had a target on his back, that the government knew he had this blackmail material, and that they were sending hit squads to silence him.
And that paranoia provides the crucial context for the events of November 2012. Enter Gregory Fall.
Ah, right.
The neighbor. He was an American expat, a builder who had relocated from Florida to Ambergris Caye, seeking a quiet retirement. And he happened to be McAfee's neighbor. And to put it bluntly, he absolutely despised McAfee's dogs.
And the dog issue wasn't just a minor suburban dispute.
Not at all.
McAfee didn't just have one or two pets. He kept a large pack of aggressive rescue dogs roaming his property. They menaced people walking on the beach. Fall, along with the local mayor and several other neighbors, had repeatedly filed formal complaints about them. The tension between the properties was constantly escalating.
And then, the catalyst.
Yeah.
4 of McAfee's dogs are found poisoned on his property. They are suffering immensely and have to be put down.
That's awful.
It is. And the very next day, Gregory Fall is found dead inside his home from a single 9mm gunshot wound to the back of the head.
Just the next day.
Yeah. There was no sign of forced entry. His laptop and phone are missing, but no cash or valuables were taken, ruling out a standard robbery.
Looking at this strictly from an investigative standpoint, it is an absolute circumstantial nightmare for John McAfee.
A total nightmare.
You have a highly public, bitter feud. You have the poisoning of the beloved dogs. And less than 24 hours later, the neighbor complaining about the dogs is executed.
Right. So the Belizean police immediately name McAfee a person of interest and announce they want to bring him in for questioning.
But McAfee refuses to go in. He vanishes.
He immediately calls reporters from burner phones and claims that Fall's murder was actually a botched hit meant for him.
Wait, really? He spins it so he's the victim.
Yeah. He argues that the corrupt government officials he had been spying on sent an assassin. The assassin went to the wrong house, killed the neighbor, and now the police are using this as an excuse to bring him into custody.
He genuinely argues that the police don't want to question him about a murder. They want to detain him, torture him, find out where the keylogger data is stored, and kill him.
It's important to note here that Belizean authorities continually stated to the international press that they only wanted him for questioning. They had not issued an arrest warrant for murder.
Okay, that's a big distinction.
It is.
Yeah.
But McAfee's reality was entirely shaped by his belief that he was marked for death. And legally speaking, while he was never criminally charged in Belize, the shadow of Fall's death never left him.
No, it followed him forever.
Years later, in 2019, a U.S. civil court ordered McAfee to pay $25 million in a wrongful death suit brought by Fall's estate.
A case he lost by default because he flat out refused to appear in court or acknowledge the jurisdiction. But let's go back to his escape in 2012, because the mechanics of his evasion are straight out of a bizarre, dark comedy.
Oh, the evasion is wild.
He famously told reporters that when the police originally came to his compound to question him, he literally dug a hole in the sand on his property, buried himself, placed a cardboard box over his head so he wouldn't suffocate, and hid there for hours listening to the police walk directly above him.
And from there, he goes completely underground. He is moving between safe houses in Belize, continually giving interviews to wired journalists, painting the Belizean government as a cartel.
And eventually he manages to cross the border into Guatemala with his 17-year-old girlfriend, Samantha.
And this is the moment we mentioned at the very beginning, the supreme irony.
The JPEG.
Yes. The man who invented commercial cybersecurity gets caught because of a JPEG.
So 2 journalists from Vice magazine join him on the run in Guatemala. They take a photo with him and post it online, but they forgot to scrub the EXIF data. Explain to the listener how monumental of a screw-up that is for a tech icon.
It's a foundational error. I mean, EXIF stands for Exchangeable Image File Format.
Yeah.
When you take a digital photo, your smartphone or camera doesn't just capture the pixels, it embeds a massive amount of hidden metadata into the file itself.
Like what?
It records the camera model, the lens aperture, the exact time, and crucially, if the device has a GPS chip, it records the exact latitude and longitude coordinates of where the photographer was standing.
So it's the digital equivalent of leaving a customized license plate at a crime scene. You would think the godfather of digital privacy would say, hey guys, make sure you strip the metadata before you upload that.
You would think so. But within hours of Vice publishing the article, internet sleuths downloaded the image, extracted the XIF data using simple, freely available software, and pinpointed his exact location at a specific resort in Guatemala. The Guatemalan police moved in immediately and arrested him for entering the country illegally. He requested political asylum, but the Guatemalan government quickly denied it. He was suddenly facing imminent deportation back to Belize.
Back to the place he genuinely believed he would be tortured and murdered. So, facing the ultimate corner, what does he do?
He gets creative.
He employs a medical ruse. While sitting in the Guatemalan detention center, he collapses. He suffers what are initially reported to the world as 2 minor heart attacks. He's rushed to a hospital.
But as he later admitted with zero hesitation or shame, he faked those heart attacks.
Unbelievable.
It was a brilliantly calculated performance designed to stall the legal machinery. By forcing a medical emergency, it bought his legal team in Guatemala the crucial 48 hours they needed to file a series of complex injunctions and appeals.
And the delay tactics actually work. Instead of putting him on a plane back to Belize, the Guatemalan authorities eventually decide it's too much of a diplomatic headache and they deport him to Miami, Florida. He lands in the U.S., a free man, having successfully completely evaded the Belizean authorities. But as you pointed out in your notes regarding the financial indictments, he couldn't just quietly retire to a penthouse in Miami Beach. His reality had completely shifted.
Exactly. We have to rewind slightly to understand his mindset arriving in Miami in late 2012. You see, the media narrative of the eccentric tech billionaire on the run was fundamentally flawed at that point, because he wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't even a 100-millionaire anymore.
Right. The 2008 financial crash absolutely devastated his net worth. The New York Times reported that his peak fortune of around $100 million plummeted to roughly $4 million.
And we need to understand how that happened to understand his later actions.
Yeah.
McAfee didn't just have $100 million sitting in a checking account.
He was spending it.
He had made massive, heavily leveraged bets. He bought spectacular real estate across the U.S., a 280-acre ranch in Colorado, an estate in Hawaii, a custom mansion in Texas, and he financed a lot of this by borrowing against his significant holdings in Lehman Brothers bonds.
Okay, let's break that down for a second. Leveraged real estate and Lehman bonds. When you are leveraged, you are basically borrowing money to buy an asset, using your other assets as collateral. Right.
Correct. It's a great strategy when the market goes up. But in 2008, the underlying architecture of the financial system cracked. Lehman Brothers, an institution that seemed too big to fail, collapsed entirely.
Meaning those bonds became useless.
Virtually worthless overnight. When his collateral vanished, the banks issued margin calls. They demanded immediate repayment of the loans he used to buy the real estate.
But the housing market was also tanking at the exact same time, so he couldn't sell the houses for what he paid for them.
Precisely. He was caught in a vicious liquidity trap. He had to liquidate these incredible properties for pennies on the dollar just to satisfy the banks. So when he lands in Miami in 2012, he is, by his own previous standards, cash poor.
So he lands in Miami financially ruined. But instead of quietly rebuilding, his trauma-induced paranoia metastasizes into a hatred of the institutions that he feels robbed him, starting with the IRS. And this leads directly to the federal indictments. The DOJ alleged that from 2014 to 2018, John McAfee completely failed to file any tax returns. But he wasn't quietly hiding this. He was actively boasting about it on social media.
He tweeted repeatedly that taxes were illegal. He told interviewers on camera that he hadn't filed a return in nearly a decade. He framed his tax evasion not as a financial crime, but as an act of patriotic, libertarian rebellion.
I have to push back on his strategy here, though. Why would someone who is already a highly visible public figure, who knows the federal government is watching him, loudly confess to a felony?
It is puzzling.
I mean, here's a man running for president of the United States on the libertarian ticket in 2016 and 2020, seeking the highest office in the land while openly taunting the IRS. Was this a genuine political protest, or was it just supreme, blinding arrogance?
It was likely a toxic brew of both, heavily seasoned with that deep-seated need for control we discussed. McAfee possessed a monumental ego. He truly believed he could outsmart any system. He claimed he was actively blackmailing the U.S. government, hinting that they wouldn't catch him because he possessed state secrets. But if you look at the DOJ indictment, it outlines a very standard, albeit large-scale evasion scheme.
Right. It wasn't some complex offshore shell company labyrinth. They alleged he simply hid his newly acquired assets, real estate, a yacht, luxury vehicles, by putting everything in nominee names.
Exactly. A nominee name is just using someone else's legal identity to hold the title to an asset you control. He bought a yacht, but put it in his wife's name, or a bodyguard's name.
Just to keep his own name off the paperwork.
The goal is to make sure your Social Security number is never attached to a major purchase, so the IRS algorithms don't flag you for having wealth you aren't paying taxes on.
But if he wasn't paying taxes, and his tech fortune was decimated by 2008, how was he funding this newly lavish, globe-trotting lifestyle by 2017? How was he buying yachts and paying security teams?
That's the million-dollar question.
And this brings us to what might be the most fascinating pivot of his entire life, the crypto era.
If ever there was a perfect match of a man and an era, it was John McAfee and the 2017 cryptocurrency boom.
It's like a casino where the pit bosses were completely asleep, and McAfee figured out how to rig the roulette wheel just by pointing at it.
That is a perfect analogy. The SEC and the DOJ brought massive fraud charges against him and his bodyguard, Jamie Watson Jr., detailing a highly lucrative, highly illegal operation.
Okay, let's get into the details.
The first part of this was a classic pump-and-dump scheme, which the crypto world colloquially calls scalping.
Okay, explain the actual plumbing of this. I understand the concept of hyping something up, but how does the blockchain mechanics or market liquidity actually allow a single tweet from one guy to instantly move millions of dollars?
To understand the pump-and-dump, you have to understand market depth and order books. In 2017, there were thousands of tiny, obscure cryptocurrencies called altcoins. Things like Verge, Redcoin, and early Dogecoin.
Right, the really small ones.
These coins had very low liquidity. That means there weren't many people buying or selling them on any given day.
So if I want to buy $1 million of Apple stock, there are thousands of sellers ready at the current price. It doesn't move the needle. But if I want to buy $1 million of an obscure altcoin...
Exactly. There aren't enough sellers at the current price.
Yeah.
So the exchange automatically matches you with sellers asking for slightly higher prices, eating through the order book. A sudden influx of buy orders forces the price to skyrocket vertically in a matter of minutes.
And McAfee knew this. He had amassed a huge Twitter following, well over 1 million people who still viewed him as a tech oracle. So he and his team would quietly buy up massive quantities of these cheap altcoins when they were worth fractions of a penny.
Then he would fire off a tweet, a coin of the day endorsement. He would tell his followers that this specific coin had revolutionary technology and was going to change the world.
And his followers, hoping to get rich quick on the advice of a tech billionaire, would rush to the exchanges to buy it.
Yeah. This sudden flood of retail buyers eats up the order book, and the price artificially spikes by 50, 100, sometimes 500%.
And the very second it spiked, McAfee and his team would immediately sell or dump all of their previously acquired cheap coins into that surge.
They provided the supply for the demand he just artificially created. They walk away with massive profits, the buying frenzy exhausts itself, and the price subsequently crashes back to earth, leaving his followers holding utterly worthless tokens.
The authorities alleged they made over $2 million just from these rapid-fire pump and dumps. It's incredibly cynical. He is literally using his own supporters as his personal liquidity pool.
But that $2 million was small change compared to his other revenue stream, Initial coin offerings, or ICOs?
Let's break down ICOs because this is where the SEC really brings down the hammer. An ICO is basically a startup trying to raise money, right? But instead of selling shares of stock in a company, they sell digital tokens.
Right, and these startups realized that in the chaos of 2017, a John McAfee endorsement was the ultimate marketing tool. So they hired him.
But he didn't tell his followers he was hired. That's the core of the fraud.
Precisely. Under federal securities law, specifically the anti-touting provisions, if you're being compensated to promote a security to the public, you must explicitly disclose the nature and amount of that compensation.
So you can't just pretend to be an unbiased analyst when you are actually a paid spokesperson.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But McAfee presented himself as an impartial visionary investor. He publicly claimed on Twitter that he had absolutely no financial stake in the ICOs he was promoting.
When in reality, he was functioning as a highly paid mercenary.
The indictments allege he charged startups up to $105,000 per tweet to promote their ICOs. Plus, he demanded a massive percentage of the raised funds in the form of the digital tokens themselves.
All told, the government says he secretly pocketed over $11 million from these undisclosed promotions.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is fascinating how perfectly the cryptocurrency space fit his worldview at the time. McAfee viewed crypto as the ultimate tool for absolute financial independence, a way to circumvent central banks, fiat currency, and government control entirely.
It aligned flawlessly with his anti-establishment ethos.
It did. But in his rush to exploit this decentralized frontier, he abandoned any pretense of ethical behavior.
To understand why he was acting so recklessly, why he felt completely unburdened by the rules that govern the rest of us, we have to look deeper into his internal world. We have to talk about the psychology of paranoia, the escapism, and the demons that seem to chase him across the globe.
And to do that, we have to look at his formative years. McAfee endured a deeply traumatic upbringing.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
He was raised in Virginia by a father who was, by McAfee's own description to the BBC, an abusive, severely alcoholic man. When John was just 15 years old, his father died by suicide, shooting himself in the family home.
That is a staggering foundational trauma for a teenager. He once told a reporter from Wired magazine, "Every day I wake up with him." That shadow clearly never left his psyche.
Psychological trauma of that magnitude often breeds an intense, lifelong need for control and absolute security. And ironically, he built a multi-billion-dollar industry based entirely on providing digital security to others.
But personally, he could never find it.
No. His lifestyle choices became increasingly bizarre and fortress-like as he aged. In Tennessee, a local news crew went to interview him, and he chose to conduct the entire on-camera interview while gripping a loaded handgun in each hand, stating he only felt safe behind locked doors while armed.
He surrounded himself with heavily armed ex-convicts. He lived in a perpetual state of hypervigilance.
And then there's the yacht.
Right. In 2019, he literally fled the United States on a yacht he named The Great Mystery, claiming that a secret grand jury was coming to arrest him in the middle of the night.
He spent months bouncing around international waters, visiting the Bahamas, the Dominican Republic.
Where he was briefly arrested for pulling into port with a yacht full of high-caliber military weapons, by the way.
Right, and eventually Cuba. This raises an important question about his mental state. When you look at a man who spends his entire life building literal fortresses in the jungle and digital fortresses on computers, how much of his erratic behavior was driven by genuine, debilitating clinical paranoia?
And how much was a carefully curated performance?
Right.
Was he maintaining his bad boy, outlaw mystique specifically to keep his name in the headlines and keep his crypto pumps profitable?
It's the central paradox of his character. He was a master manipulator of the media, which implies a high degree of calculation and control.
Right.
Yet, his actions fleeing countries, carrying weapons in his living room, the heavy drug use in Belize point to a man who is genuinely, deeply terrified of unseen enemies.
It's highly likely that the performance and the reality eventually bled into one another until even he couldn't tell the difference between the assassins in his mind and the federal agents actually building a case against him.
Very likely.
To really understand why anyone paid attention to him in 2017, why millions of people trusted his crypto advice, or why the media indulged his fugitive antics for so long, we have to look backward. We have to look at the genesis of his fame. We have to look at the antivirus pioneer.
It is easy to forget, given his later notoriety, that John McAfee was a legitimate, foundational technological pioneer.
He was.
He worked at NASA, UNIVAC, Xerox, and Lockheed Martin. He was a brilliant systems programmer. In 1987, he founded McAfee Associates from his home, creating one of the very first commercial antivirus programs.
But the turning point, the moment that elevated him from a successful Silicon Valley programmer to a global household name, happened in March 1992. It was the Michelangelo virus.
The Michelangelo virus is a fascinating case study in early digital epidemiology. It was a boot sector virus.
Okay, let's explain that. How does a boot sector virus differ from me just downloading a sketchy file?
Most viruses infect a specific program, like a word processor.
Oh.
If you don't open the program, the virus doesn't run. But the boot sector is the very first piece of code a computer reads when you turn the power on, before the operating system even loads.
No, it's way deeper.
It infects the deepest, most fundamental level of the machine. The Michelangelo virus was designed to embed itself there, lie completely dormant, and then activate on a specific date. March 6th, the birthday of the Renaissance artist Michelangelo.
And the mechanics of the payload were absolutely brutal. If your computer turned on that day, the virus would immediately overwrite the first 100 sectors of your hard drive with nulls. Effectively, it destroyed the file allocation table, or the FAT.
Yes. And to use an analogy, imagine your hard drive is the Library of Congress. The file allocation table is the card catalog that tells the librarian exactly where every single book is located.
Okay.
The Michelangelo virus didn't necessarily burn all the books, it just burned the card catalog.
So all your data is technically still on the magnetic platters, but your computer has absolutely no idea how to find it, piece it together, or read it. For the average user in 1992, the hard drive is effectively destroyed.
Exactly. It was a very real, very malicious threat. But how John McAfee handled it changed the tech industry forever.
He didn't just quietly release a patch.
No. He went on national television, he gave urgent interviews to major newspapers, and he confidently predicted a global catastrophe.
He claimed that up to 5 million computers worldwide were currently infected and would be completely wiped out when the clock struck midnight on March 6th.
The media went into an absolute frenzy. It was one of the first true global cyber panics. Sales of McAfee's antivirus software went through the roof. People were terrified, lining up at electronics stores to buy his software in a box.
And then March 6th arrived.
And the reality was incredibly underwhelming. Instead of 5 million computers, only a few thousand machines were reported to have been affected globally. The grand techno-doom was a complete dud.
The blowback was immediate. The tech press accused him of wild exaggeration to deliberately sell his product. He eventually walked back his numbers, arguing that the low infection rate was because people listened to him, bought his software, and took precautions.
Naturally.
But the damage to his reputation among tech purists was permanent, even as his bank account swelled to astronomical levels.
Which leads us to a critical analysis of his legacy. Did John McAfee invent the concept of antivirus software, or did he simply perfect the marketing of fear?
That's a great way to put it.
He realized very early on that the general public, and crucially the mainstream media, did not understand how computers actually worked. To them, PCs were magic boxes, and human beings are naturally terrified of invisible threats they don't understand.
So he capitalized on it.
McAfee weaponized that fear. He used the public's lack of technical literacy to build an empire based on selling peace of mind.
Here's where it gets really interesting. In 1994, he completely resigns from McAfee Associates. A few years later, he sells his remaining stake for $100 million.
And for the rest of his life, he actively, aggressively bashed the software that bore his own name.
He literally posted a profanity-laced viral video online explicitly mocking how difficult it was to uninstall McAfee software, calling it intrusive bloatware that slowed down computers worse than actual viruses.
The man who built the Shield spent his later years telling the entire world the Shield was garbage.
It shows a complete detachment from his own legacy. He had moved on to what he perceived as the next frontier of freedom, which eventually led him to the unregulated crypto markets and ultimately to his final downfall.
The downward spiral accelerates rapidly after his yacht escapes the U.S. in 2019. In October 2020, the music finally stops.
He is arrested at the international airport in Barcelona, Spain. He was attempting to board a flight to Turkey.
The U.S. Department of Justice had finally caught up with him on the multi-year tax evasion charges, and the SEC crypto fraud indictments were simultaneously unsealed.
He was placed in the Brians II penitentiary near Barcelona, entering a grueling period of preventative detention while Spanish courts debated the U.S. extradition request.
But even behind bars, he managed to control his narrative.
Always.
He communicated constantly through his wife and his legal team, having them post his thoughts to Twitter. He claimed he was content. He famously tweeted that the prison food was decent, he had made friends among the inmates, and he compared the graffiti on his concrete cell walls to a 1,000-page thriller novel.
But the reality of his legal situation was incredibly grim. He was 75 years old, facing decades in a U.S. federal prison if extradited.
He argued forcefully to the Spanish judge that the charges were entirely politically motivated, that the U.S. government wanted to make a high-profile example of him for his libertarian defiance.
And he said that extradition at his age was essentially a death sentence.
And then the breaking point arrives. On June 23, 2021, the Spanish National Court issued its final ruling. They formally approved his extradition to the United States to face the tax evasion charges.
Hours later, John McAfee was found dead in his prison cell. The official ruling from the Catalan Justice Department and the results of subsequent autopsies stated that the cause of death was suicide by hanging.
But given the life he lived, a simple official ruling was never going to be the end of the story.
No way. His death instantly ignited a firestorm of lingering doubts and explosive internet conspiracy theories.
We must approach this impartially, looking strictly at the claims made by those close to him and the massive digital trail he left behind.
Right. His widow, Janice McAfee, and his primary lawyers vehemently pushed back against the suicide ruling. They argued that he was absolutely not suicidal.
They claimed he had just learned of the extradition ruling, yes, but that they had already discussed the next legal steps and were actively preparing an appeal.
Janice stated publicly that he never felt more free than when he had lost all his wealth, directly contradicting the idea that financial ruin or the threat of prison drove him to despair.
And then there's the evidence he seated himself. This is where the conspiracy theories gain their traction.
McAfee spent years cultivating the idea that powerful, shadowy forces wanted him silenced. In November 2019, long before his arrest, he got a very specific, very prominent tattoo on his right bicep.
It read WHCKD.
He tweeted a photo of it to his millions of followers with a chilling caption. I'm going to read his exact tweet to you. Getting subtle messages from U.S. officials saying, in effect, "We're coming for him, McAfee. We're going to kill yourself. I got a tattoo today just in case. If I suicide myself, I didn't. I was whack. Check my right arm."
And he doubled down on this narrative a year later. In October 2020, shortly after arriving in the Spanish prison, he tweeted again, "Know that if I hang myself a la Epstein, it will be no fault of mine."
Drawing a direct parallel to Jeffrey Epstein, whose own jailhouse death spawned endless conspiracy theories about powerful people silencing a liability.
This raises an important question, perhaps the most difficult question of his entire saga. Did John McAfee, facing the terrifying, inescapable reality of spending his final years locked in a concrete federal cell, take his own life, but maliciously engineer these tweets beforehand to ensure his anti-establishment legend outlived him?
Did he want to inflict one final, unsolvable puzzle on the authorities he so deeply despised?
Or did he genuinely truly fear assassination by a government agency, and were his warnings prescient?
We cannot know for certain, and we aren't here to declare a verdict. You, the listener, have to weigh the immense complexities of a man who cried wolf his entire life while living in a forest full of actual wolves.
Well said.
A man who faked heart attacks to avoid deportation, who lied to reporters to generate software sales, who rigged crypto markets with a single tweet, and who lived in a self-constructed reality of spies, cartels, and hitmen.
When a master of deception dies under circumstances he perfectly predicted, the truth becomes almost impossible to extract from the myth.
Which brings us to the unresolved legacy of John David McAfee. He was undeniably a brilliant pioneer. His early work fundamentally helped secure the nascent digital world.
Almost everyone listening to this deep dive has likely utilized software descended from his original code concepts. Yet, he lived a life of total physical, moral, and legal chaos.
He's the ultimate paradox. Was he a misunderstood genius, driven mad by his own paranoias and the ghosts of his traumatic past? Or was he a cold, calculating opportunist, a grifter who manipulated media and markets until he simply ran out of moves?
And a deeper question for all of us. Can we separate the ubiquitous protective software on our computers from the deeply flawed man who created it?
It forces us to examine the heroes we elevate in the tech industry. We often confuse technological brilliance with personal integrity. We assume because someone can write elegant code, they possess a sound mind.
McAfee exploited that confusion masterfully for decades.
So what does this all mean? As we wrap up this deep dive into the source material, I want you to think about the nature of truth in our digital age.
Yeah.
When a man controls his own narrative as aggressively and deceptively as John McAfee did, using Twitter, documentaries, and the press as his personal megaphones to broadcast his own mythology, how do we decipher fact from fiction? How do we find the truth when the source himself is actively trying to distort it?
I'm going to leave you with one last thing to mull over. The ultimate paradox of John McAfee's existence.
What's that?
He dedicated his early life and his brilliant mind to creating software that protects us. Programs specifically designed to hunt down hidden, malicious code that seeks to destroy our systems from the inside. Yet, he spent his later life seemingly injecting that exact same chaos, toxicity, and destruction into his own reality and the lives of everyone around him. Did the architect of digital security ultimately engineer his own human virus?
Thank you for joining us as we explored the incredible, chaotic source material of John McAfee's life. Keep questioning the narratives behind the technology we rely on, keep looking for the truth beneath the code, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.